We haven't learned about that in civics yet. We haven't learned about that in civics yet.
Is the new guy coming, Warner?
Yes, he is. Yep. Once we get started.
He'll be in the.
Yeah, he'll come in. He'll come in through the audience link. So.
Okay, well, good evening all. Welcome to the Growth Planning Committee's meeting for October 19th, 2021. We'll start off with the introductions of members and guests. Dan Saunders, Janet.
Hi, Janet Powell.
Paul.
Paul Hogan.
Jim.
Hi, James Brown.
Who else we got? Werner.
Yeah, Warner Gilliam.
Liz.
Liz Durfee, planning consultant.
And Tom.
Tom Morgan, planning consultant.
Excellent. And I see there are two attendees. I see Eli just joined. So welcome. Yeah. Thank you. Hello, Eli.
Hi there. Sorry to be joining late. Just getting set up here.
No problem. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to introduce yourself to who you are, and if you'd like.
Yeah. My name is Eli, and I'm just started yesterday as a community planner, Kennebunkport, and I'm coming from the town of Bodenham, where I've been for a little over a year. And before that, I've been in the master's program at the Muskie School that I'm just finishing up now for policy planning and management. And before that, I was in organic agriculture for about 10 years. And I did, after that, I was in building, house carpentry, and home repair. And now I'm joining you now in Kennebunkport. So I'm excited to be here.
Oh, welcome. Good background there. So thanks a lot for joining us. And Liz, I see you've joined. You want to introduce yourself? Liz Johnson.
Hi, Liz Johnson. I'm.
That's good.
It's all right. We're not doing
biographies. We just did. We're just doing Eli to welcome on. So, all right. So good. We got a good quorum. Allow us to have some good discussions this evening. And so, second thing on our schedule is our plan structure. Who will lead us through that discussion?
Sorry, I'm having issues with my mute button. I don't know why. I will do that. And I'm going to just pull up a slide that has a lot of text on it, but I just thought it might be a little bit easier to just talk about what the final deliverable is going to look like. So I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. So that as we're kind of pulling together some more pieces. Okay, do you see the PowerPoint slides?
Yes.
Okay. We can get going on the organization. So let's see here. So there's a couple options on the screen here, and obviously they're not the only two options, but what Tom and I are interested in hearing from all of you is sort of what you're interested in terms of the overall kind of structure and organization of the plan. If you'll recall back, I guess like 2 years ago now, we talked about one of the things that the town or the committee was interested in was having sort of a user-friendly summary. And so Tom and I are just interested in your input basically around how long that user-friendly summary is and what information goes in the user-friendly summary versus either like a second volume or a few appendices. So all of the information is essentially going to be the same. All of the, the body of the plan, the chapters that we've been working on. We're going to touch up the formatting a bit, but they're going to be either in an appendix or a volume 2, whatever we end up calling it. But then the beginning of the plan, we're interested in hearing if you would like the sort of the front matter to serve as a separate volume, the initial chapters of the plan. Should it have the full vision chapter, the full future land use chapter, or should it have kind of highlights from 2 of those chapters? So I'm going to leave this up on the screen for a couple minutes and stop talking so you can kind of take a peek through these elements, and then let us know what your thoughts are on organization.
Well, I like let's throw out there is I like option 2, mainly because it includes really sort of an overview and summaries of the vision section instead of the chapter itself, and also certainly the future land use and our public input, which I sort of see it as providing sort of an executive summary of the overall plan. And then it includes the implementation table, which is the one we certainly wanted to have, so that people can quickly sort of go through, see what the overview is, get an idea what the vision was for the plan, how we were able to get some public input, what the recommendations of the plan for future land use, and then sort of the implementation piece. And then the details, I guess, are in the back or in volume 2. So I think that's a pretty good, decent outlay. What do other members think?
I agree with that. I think that's was kind of the consensus when we reviewed those plans from other towns to, kind of go with that user-friendly look. I think this would work well with that.
Yeah, I agree. This is Paul. I think option 2 is very close to what we talked about at the beginning. And it would be, I think, much more helpful to people, particularly as we go to town for the town vote, it would be something that people could read and put their arms around. And those who want to read more could, of course, go to whether you call it volume 2 or the appendix, and read the detail on particularly the chapters they're interested in. But substantively, they could read only, I assume, volume 1 and get the gist of it.
Great, that's really helpful input. I think the goal will definitely to make the short volume, comprehensive enough for people to get the gist of things, but we certainly can't, we can't even include like a couple pages per chapter if we want to stay at a reasonable number of pages, which I think Tom and I are comfortable with, as long as the committee is comfortable with too. And I think that the chapters, in either case, the full chapters will be available for people who want to, search for more information on the existing conditions and read through the full set of, policies and strategies. Any other ideas for or input that you want to share with us on sort of your vision for the user-friendly piece?
We're going to incorporate some pictures, right?
Pictures?
Yeah, it's going to be very graphic friendly. Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah.
The other piece I kind of always envisioned was that implementation table being almost a standalone document on its own. that if I'm the head of a department or the chairman of a committee, I can pull out that, and I'm not sure how many pages that's going to be.
It's going to be pretty big. Yeah.
It'll be pretty big.
Yeah, but that's not a bad idea, Dan. We could entitle that volume 3. You know.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
something that should be like, here's the working document. Here's my action items. These are things that my committee or my department have to work on.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's more likely to get done if it's manageable size. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely a different structure than what the current plan, in terms of how the current plan is set up. But I think this hits all of the, required items that we have to have. And I think for a lot of folks that'll be interested in kind of what's the bottom line, is look at the implementation table, and that's where you see that there's a bottom line in terms of, the look forward.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that?
No, I think when we're doing the implementation table, we should have a little more discussion on how that should look as well. From a user standpoint, it'd be nice if I'm the head of Public Works that I have all the strategies that Public Works is responsible for in my section, versus trying to find it within the different chapter.
Yeah, Dan, we will be giving that table plenty of attention. We have it tentatively scheduled for the second meeting in November and the first week of December to discuss with the committee.
Okay, excellent.
The other thing that I think will probably be helpful is to have all of the implementation items in a spreadsheet so that folks can kind of sort through, either by department or by different headings, and kind of keep track of the implementation status. So that will be sort of more of a behind the scenes tool for staff and committee.
Okay.
But that's probably going to be pretty helpful too.
Yeah, you know what, Liz, that's a really good point, because, that's something that Growth Planning Committee really realistically did on their own. Dan, I think, you spent a fair amount of time with that, parsing out all of the strategies into a table that was really helpful. So, because I think, in the previous plan, you had a plan that had a lot of good data in it, and it was structured a certain way. But, as far as an actual tool to use, not really so user friendly, in that regard. If I'm a department and I'm looking, just tell me what I've got to do, or what direction that I need to head. And if I need background, then this way here, you can look back into the individual chapters for more detail. But, I think that is one of the things that we didn't really fully see all of the implementation pieces until it got put into a table for everybody to look at.
Yeah, and the table is also going to tell the department head when the task needs to be accomplished and hopefully where the money's coming from.
Yeah, and that's that's across the board too for for different committees and other groups as well. So yep.
This is slightly related, but can we, now that we're getting down to the home stretch, publish particularly when we're talking about the strategies, publish a schedule in advance so that, because people say, when are you going to talk about this? And when's this going to be talked about? And, people have interest in different topics. So if we were able to, and then we'd of course have to try to keep to it and not let it slip. But we really can't afford to at this point. So that, people would know when they went to our webpage, how it looks when the topics are going to be hit again.
That's a good
strategy
idea.
was.
Good idea, Paul. And I was going to say, we might also treat it like a special event. You know, those meetings where it's going to be discussed. And what
Yep.
we've done, you know, before is made an effort to get the word out via the email lists.
So we had review of the schedule on our agenda tonight. Do you want me to pull that up now, or do you want to do that after the next agenda item?
Yeah, we could pull it up now. We're talking about it, so. I mean,
I'm going to pull up just the draft here, and again, we're, I think, interested in your thoughts on this, just mindful of the time it might take to go through our strategies. So here we are reviewing a rough draft, incomplete draft of the future land use chapter. We'll probably need part of another meeting to review the chapter again. And then Tom and I are going to be working to get a fairly fleshed out set of the policies and strategies for all of the chapters together so that we can start reviewing those in November. And then what we'll do is incorporate the strategies into the implementation table, and that's where we'll put information on who's sort of the lead responsible party and ideal timeline for completion and that sort of thing. So this is what we have laid out tentatively. And if you want, we can certainly, target sets of chapters at each of those meetings and send that and have that information available in advance, like which strategies from which chapter we'll be covering at, the November 16th meeting, for example.
mhm.
And perhaps after the 21st, we add, we're going to have to share this with all other committees and departments and, ask them to give us feedback. So maybe, it's kind of great timing that sort of happens over the holidays. There'll be some time where if we got it out, the implementation table out, before the holidays, then in 2 or 3 weeks, we might have feedback, from the planning committee that says, forget it, that, we can't do it in that time frame or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I was going to bring that up. That I want to make sure we've got some adequate time built in there to put those implementation pieces out there to the responsible parties and just get that practical feedback.
Brenner, what's our drop dead deadline for public hearings?
As far as for the June warrant is
Getting the plan in front of the town meeting.
Sure. Yeah, so we generally for June, so that schedule isn't published yet, but once it gets published, we typically start having those conversations in February.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I recall usually by end of February, we got to have pretty solid.
Yeah. We typically talk about draft documents, in February, but this isn't a half-page warrant article,
Right.
so it's and I think we'll be pretty fleshed out, at that point, but that's that's the rough timeline that we're looking at is, we want a good solid draft to start those conversations and get it into the pipeline for if we need to do any additional legal review on anything, things like that. We should probably also talk a little bit about what the mechanics look like for getting it in front of the state, as well. for a consistency, for a consistency review there.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I'll give the fellow at the state a call and see what their turnaround time is.
yep.
So when we finish up the future land use section chapter, we've completed our chapter reviews, right? Is that true? Right?
Yes, and they're all drafts, so you guys can go back and if you see something doesn't look right or you had second thoughts about, just I encourage you to do so.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point to bring up, Tom. Well, I'm thinking, or maybe Werner, good question for you. I mean, is it worth to sort of put that out even ahead of what all the strategies and policies are for people to review that would need to approve the warrant? So basically the selectmen.
I mean, you mean as far as just a reminder for folks to take a look at take a look at what we've done so far?
Yeah, or once, like if we set a time, like by December, everybody in the committee has had the opportunity to go back through all the draft chapters, make any recommendations and changes, maybe by the end of December, whatever time frame we set, and then at least the documentation and the chapters and all that can be sent out, sort of looked at ahead of time before we go through the review of the policies and strategies and so forth. That may take a little bit more time into January and so forth, just to get that piece out first, let them look at it and feel comfortable with what's written.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's, so I don't think it's a bad idea to put it out to the, what I would say maybe are the responsible parties. My concern is that with a really big document that you're not going to get folks to really read it, and where a lot of it is inventory, a lot of it's inventory information, those aren't necessarily the things that are going to, create a lot of debate necessarily, the inventory pieces. It's the implementation and the strategies pieces, I think, that are the nuts and bolts of it. But I'm certainly, happy to distribute it to, the identified parties, that we have, to get, feedback, say, all right, here's what we got so far. And, now's, if there's any, if we have any, glaring, errors or omissions here, now's the time to, to bring it up. I think if that's what we're looking for and we're just sent,
Yeah, I think that's what I'd be looking for, because it is a little bit different than our previous plan, right? We've got a lot more sustainability, impact of sea level rise and all that sort of within the documents. We want to make sure that they're on board with the way the text is laid out. That is going to drive our policies and strategies. And that they're on board.
I think it would be worth for you as chair, that we do a big distribution to the biggest list the town has, because this process has been going on for so long that we've lost people. It started and then it stopped and then it started. Sort of send out an email saying, well, here we are. This is where we are today. We finished the drafts of the chapters. We're going to, from, November, whatever, through January, whatever, we're going to be developing all the strategies. The meetings are going to be held on these dates. Here's what we've got so far. We'd love to have your feedback. It might help focus people on what this process is and tell them there's going to be a June, ballot to expect. And, who knows how many people will actually look at it, but a lot of people I think would read the email and at least understand the process, which I think would be helpful. I think the worst thing we could do is have people wake up in May and say, well, I didn't know this was going on.
Yeah, for sure.
What are you guys talking about? So even though we've done promotion It's easy enough to send out an email with the big attachment or a link to the page. I think it's a little hard when I went looking for this chapter on the page today, when I had trouble with the link, you have to go through all the lovely pictures and all the sessions and all of that to find the chapters. So maybe we could somehow either put that someplace else, put all the chapters someplace else, or move them to the top, just so if we're going to direct people to it, even other committee people, that they know what they're looking for.
You're talking about the project website, Paul?
Yes.
Oh, that's easy. We can do that in 5 seconds. We'll just move the chapters up to the very top of the page.
Yeah, that'd be good. Good suggestion. Yeah, and I was certainly, I was also thinking of getting this out and ensuring that our selectmen on board.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's part of what I think killed the 2005 plan, is they lost some of the selectmen in support of changes they had in there. And I want to make sure that they're still on board, because we need their support to get this through. So that was my first audience I was thinking of. And then obviously, certainly the rest of the town folks, and getting, their input. Hopefully, we've been getting a little bit more of it. And I certainly appreciate that, and hope that will continue. That's a good suggestion, Paul. How much time would you guys like to have to sort of just do another review of those chapters, just to make sure we're comfortable with what was written, before we kind of say those are done and this is what we want to submit?
By the next meeting, I could do it.
Okay.
2 weeks.
I might need a little more time myself, but I'm happy to go with 2 weeks. Jim, Janet?
I'm fine with that.
2 weeks? Okay.
Yeah, I think based on our time frame, it's probably going to need to be 2 weeks or less to make it happen.
So let's give ourselves that job then, before the first November meeting, that we go back through these chapters and give them another review. Any suggested changes, please just send them right into Tom and Liz. How do you guys want to manage that, Tom and Liz, if we have changes?
Between now and then, I'll go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think if you are able to send written comments, that might help expedite the time that we spend in the growth planning committee meeting. If we have kind of everything, we can sort of organize it if they come in advance, just because we do have fairly limited meeting time to get through all of the kind of remaining items. So written comments, I would say. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should just send them to everybody on the committee and you at the same time, so that.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So I just, I think that's fine, to share, suggested comments that you have there. I just, this is my caution just to everyone, just to make sure that we don't engage in, in email conversations back and forth, but I think if it's, here are my comments for the land use chapter, boom, sent.
That's it.
Done. And that's it.
Yep, that's it.
That's fine. One thought that I had, if folks are interested, I could also check in with Lori on maybe having us on as an agenda item with the selectmen, maybe in December, if we think that might work. And we could do an update, an update meeting with them, as an agenda item during one of their meetings. The meetings, so November, December, sometimes they'll cut out, meetings. And so if there's only going to be one in December, I'd like to know that ahead of time, if folks are interested in doing that, or we could do it in January too. But I think December might be a better.
I'd rather do December and be able to present to them and say, hey, here's the final chapters. We'll work on the implementation schedule.
Excellent
Good
idea,
idea.
because you want to find out if the selectmen have an issue sooner rather than later.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And just where there's limited, the schedule gets a little bit, wonky around the holidays. I want to make sure we put that out on the radar sooner rather than later.
What is their regular schedule, Werner?
So they tend to meet, I want to say it's the second and fourth on Thursdays. But again, the schedule, sometimes we get some that are omitted. But I'll reach out to Tracy and Lori and get some feedback on that for a December meeting if they have those dates solidified yet.
Probably won't do the 4th Thursday. It'll be the 23rd. So
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
likely the
saying.
9th, right?
Yeah, it may change just because of some of the date conflicts. Yeah, they're not going to have a meeting on the 23rd. But yeah, so I'll run that down and report back.
Okay, sounds good. Any other discussion on the schedule?
Yeah, Warner, are you giving them the same opportunity, same pass through the whole thing as we are, or different information?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is that we want to have the opportunity to present what we have so far, and so I think what we would do is, we'd ask them to review it ahead of time, but then I think maybe a high level overview of what we've done so far is what I would expect for a December meeting.
Okay. I wasn't sure if we were giving them the opportunity to go through all the chapters like we were going to go through.
Yeah, I think that work is really the growth planning committees to do that. I don't know necessarily. We've been the ones kind of working through and living and breathing with this. Certainly if they want to provide input on it, we'll take all the input that we can, on it. But I don't know that that's my expectation. That I'd get that we'd get a red line, version back of everything.
No. I didn't know if they'd have the opportunity just to read through all the chapters and just, I'm not expecting them to do that. I'm in agreement with you that the expectation should be, but if they had it in front of us to see the details of all the chapters.
Sure. No, I'll definitely I'm going to, that'll be a suggestion, ahead of time to take some time and read through what's been done so far. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'd want to read the future land use chapter.
Right.
There'll be some key chapters they'll probably want to take at least a look at. Some of the other stuff they'll probably say that's, it's more like you say, inventory stuff.
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. So 2 weeks we should go through all our chapters and finalize any changes we want to make. And then those will be available for review. Cool. All right, so land use, future land use. I believe that is next on our agenda.
All right, I'm going to pull up some slides here, and I apologize in advance for any background noise.
No worries.
Minimize it. All right, so let's see here. Okay, does everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so everyone received a copy of sort of the working draft future land use chapter, and I just have some slides to go through, walk through some of that information and ask some questions and input from all of you. This chapter is organized into a few sections currently, and Tom and I welcome feedback on the organization itself and obviously the information in there. The first section is on growth management permits. The growth management areas are a primary requirement basically for the future land use chapter under chapter 208. So I would say the chapter is sort of geared towards describing the growth management areas and the information that's used to inform what those areas are. And then kind of checking off the boxes for what the state requires is described and included for the growth management areas. And then also, obviously, we want to incorporate some of the key topics that have come up during our discussions and the public input sessions. So with that, the first section is just on sort of background information on the growth management permits, how they're set currently. And that is, well, all of you know, but if there are members of the public that, might not know, set every couple years at 110% of the average number of permits that was issued over the last 10 years. And then the minimum number every year is currently is 40. An average of 24 have been issued in recent years. And so 40 is what has been available. And when the town does set the number of permits every year, the town doesn't include permits that are issued for affordable housing. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. But as noted in the 2012 version of the comprehensive plan, affordability wasn't defined in the ordinance then, and is still not defined. So that is something that we should also take a look at. And I've included a couple potential ways that affordability could be defined in the chapter based on information collected from the state, from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and other sources. Currently,
Hey Liz, what page is that in the chapter? I saw it this afternoon. What, page 7?
Page 7, I believe, or slide 7 on the.
Okay. And Dan, can we forgot to announce if there are people in the audience who want to comment or ask questions, how they do that. We're going to use the chat function?
Yeah, we'll use the chat function, or if they do want to talk, they can raise their hand and we can call them. They should be able to do that using the, at least on mine, it's the morph 3 buttons on an iPad. And then there's a chat feature, and then there's a raise hand if you'd like to make a comment. Thanks, Paul.
So I think this is what Paul was talking about. This is actually in the chapter draft. Just a few possible ways to look at defining affordable housing, if that's something that the Growth Planning Committee would like to, potentially include as a recommendation in the comprehensive plan, like a zoning amendment to include a definition for affordable housing. Which I think is probably a good idea. So a couple options are here. The Kennebunkport Heritage Housing Trust doesn't really have like a specific, I would say, definition, but they have a lot of criteria that they sort of include in for what affordable housing means. The state has a definition for affordable housing, and then HUD has a definition also, and there are other sources as well. These are just a handful.
Yeah, I didn't think the housing trusts, they had a specific goal in mind in order to find families for those properties who could afford those properties at what they were being offered at. But but there would certainly be people in town who could not afford to live in those houses because their income, for one or two families, one or two persons, didn't meet the minimum. I'm thinking of like somebody who sells a house and wants a single floor, a senior citizen, for example, who's in a larger home that can't be heated well, and the person needs an affordable place to live. Well, they wouldn't qualify, even if they sold their house and had, the profit to put into the new place. But they couldn't meet the income because maybe they just have Social Security and no pension. And if they invest the money they get out of the house and you get 2% off, in a savings account or 1%, they basically have no income other than Social Security. So to me, you could develop housing that would be for people who didn't have that kind of income, that would be much more like the federal approach, that housing shouldn't exceed 30% of your income.
Paul, your favorite federal definition?
Well, this particular organization does have really strict guidelines. You're right. But it's the first one, and it's wanted to make sure that they could sell all of them and move on to the next one. And I'm sure they'll do a pretty extensive review of how to change anything along the way to make it either more affordable or affordable to a different group of people. These are young families that they're aiming at right now.
Dan,
How much were they? Let me know.
They're around
300,000.
Yes.
So one thing that I think it's
they're
important.
cheap. There are some that are cheaper than that, like in the 270s and things like that.
Dan, I was going to point out we have a question and a comment from the audience.
Chat. Okay, so it says, does this mean that there could be unlimited affordable housing? It seems very unclear.
It doesn't mean that.
No.
So it's, and Warner can probably explain this better than I can, but when the town considers the average number in the last 10 years, affordable housing is not included in that number. So if there were, a handful of houses that met, qualified as affordable housing, it wouldn't contribute to that sort of 10-year average. That's my understanding, but Warner, there's a limit on the number of permits for affordable housing. It's around 10, isn't it?
Well, so what you have here is you only have really half. What I would say is you've only got about half of the equation here. You have supportive language in the comp plan, that says that, that we shouldn't put a limit on affordable housing, and I think you'll find a lot of supportive language, both in state statute and housing policies throughout for that. But what you really need to go along with that is the implementation piece of this. And that's something that's going to show up in ordinance, where you have defined, what is affordable housing and what does that look like? And as we know, just from, the conversations that we have, is that, and what's very clear in Kennebunkport is that in order to really, hit that, hit the definitions of affordable housing, we know they're likely need to be some zoning adjustments that need to be made in order to accomplish that. And so I see this as something that really needs to be a bit more fleshed out and defined, so that it's clear what exactly it is that you're creating and what exactly it is that you're exempting. Typically in other communities, when you're looking at things like this, you're looking at multifamily housing that's usually, funded through, some type of a tax credit program that also, for the most part, is going to be rental housing as opposed to ownership occupied. That's typically what you're seeing, I think, in other communities where you have that type of exemption. I will say, as a general rule, there don't tend to be a lot of communities anymore that still have growth caps. That's a bit of a thing of the past. As we've talked about here, growth caps. Whenever you develop a growth cap, and this comes just based on legal challenges that have happened, not here but elsewhere, that if you're going to have a cap, you better be prepared to have a rationale and explain what the limitation is and why is it that you're capping housing to begin with. And we've talked about the need to, what are you tying it to? Are you tying it to an infrastructure limitation that you have? Maybe it winds up being a school capacity or a wastewater capacity or something of that nature that you're pointing to.
So I was going to ask you, Werner, what kind of defense does the town have for a cap at present?
Well, what we have, at least here in our ordinance is that we've got defined. We have, at best we have defined where we want the growth directed towards. So we meet kind of the state. The state requirement piece where it says if you're going to have a cap, then you need to have to give, you need some justification. You have to, at the very least, develop a map that shows where you're going to have, growth transitional in rural areas, which is what we did before. Mm-hmm. In the past work that we had done, it was, and I don't want to speak for the committee, but anybody pipe up on the remembrance, but it seemed that there was a certain level of discomfort with getting rid of a cap, hence which is why we went the direction that we did. But it's a good question, Tom. It's not one that we've been legally challenged on, but.
You got to ask that question before you get in court.
Well, I mean, that was the reason why in 2005 we included this whole discussion of the growth areas within the comprehensive plan and identified the process for determining the number of growth permits to be allowed. And that was, for the purpose and then to drive growth towards where we had infrastructure. And this plan was approved by the state. So, I think it has some validity and some solid grounding legally, at least from my understanding, the way a comprehensive plan works to be supportive of the land use ordinances, right? So certainly everybody can challenge. That's the great thing about our country. You can challenge anything.
So Werner, just to clarify for the questioner, because it's leaving me scratching my head. If a developer were to come along with a plan and said, I want to build a 40 unit development in the rural area, and 10 of them are going to be market rate and 30 are going to be affordable, in my opinion, that because we don't have a definition of affordable, that could be a pickle. And and secondly, the 30 units, assuming that they could, as a practical matter, it would be difficult to do given zoning. But suppose they did that and had 30, those 30 would not be counted. The person could claim these 30 don't get counted in the growth cap because they're affordable housing.
Well, I don't think that you don't leave it up to the developer to declare what's what's affordable based on on their definition.
But if we had but I'm just saying under our current ordinances, there would be nothing to stop someone from doing that, and the developer would say, "So sue me. These are affordable."
Well, it would be more the other way around. It's not that we would, pursue suit with a developer. It would likely be the adverse of that.
Right.
It would. I think a practical example of it would be is like, well, we have X number of growth permits that are available, and here's what's issued, and so let's say we hit that number. We'll just pick the rural area just for conversation's sake. So we have the rural area, we have issued all of the growth permits, and developer comes along and says, I want a permit. I know we're over. I think this is affordable, and they file an application. And that point, the question is, well, great. Now, what do we do with it? We have this language in the comp plan that says, that this is what should be the case, but it's not memorialized or specified in ordinance at that point. So, as you know, we have to go with what we have specifically in the land use ordinance. Comp plan is a guidance document. Land use ordinance and the other ordinances are the operative, pieces. Now. And I don't want to get wrapped up into into a legal opinion because that's not who I am. But the next step in the process, if we were then to deny a permit, that developer would then have to seek, would have to go through the legal process to challenge that denial.
Right. So it goes to Liz's point that we should have a definition of affordability so that this problem is managed ahead of time as opposed to a lawsuit.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
I think it needs to. I think it needs to cover everybody. What if I come to you, Warner, and say, can build my house for $150,000 and I want a permit. It's affordable housing. I think it's got to cover. It's got to cover everybody. And
I think it goes back to the details of what is it? It's and I think you have to vet those types of situations and just ask yourself, is that the intent? But
it does. It brings up things like the housing that's set right now is kind of orchestrated through an organization, right? The affordable housing.
Well, this
was built.
This correct, right?
Right.
Yeah,
so are we putting? Is there anything on there that says that person owns that now? It's considered affordable housing. On say they want to put an addition on there, they can't. Are they allowed to put an addition on there to make it larger to create a bigger footprint?
That's a different set of worms, but I think Jim, you raise a you raise a good point, and that is somebody could give you land, your father-in-law say, and you put a trailer on it, and you want a permit to do it, and you live in the rural area, and the tenant are already gone, and you say, well, this is affordable housing. So
I think we need to cover.
I think we need to let someone else flesh this out.
Right, absolutely.
We'll be on this topic for 30 minutes.
No.
Really,
I think
it's a great topic, and I don't want to kill the discussion, but we have really, our time is becoming very short between now and it'll be March before we know it. And we have to issue the final, here it is, everything. So absolutely, this was actually in the last plan that we come up with a definition for affordable. And that hasn't happened yet. And that's why I think we need to include it in this next plan. And there were some other good ideas and strategies as well. We just need to move that forward. We do need to get it defined. There's obviously a lot of reasons to do so. Okay.
Dan, I have a comment and a question about growth management in general. If I could throw that out at you guys.
Sure.
Yeah, I view this growth management part of the ordinance, I view it as two different things that are going on that are kind of separate. One is where can I build? You know, that's pretty straightforward. It encourages you to build where the sewer is. But the other one is the cap itself, 40 per year. That's actually a way of regulating the pace of development in town.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of discussion I've heard, they kind of mix them all up together, but they're really two separate things. And the first one's pretty straightforward. You know, you got the sewer over there and you know, that's a logical place to encourage people to build. But the rate is a different issue. As Werner said, typically the town has to justify it. And I raise this issue because the town's best place for that justification is in the comp plan.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd welcome some input from the committee or anybody else as to, okay, if we want to embrace this 40 limit, give us some reasons so Liz and I can make sure we can address it in the plan.
Okay. Well, I mean, isn't it it's to manage your capital outlay for your infrastructure, right? You've got if you're driving, we've set 40, and let's say it doesn't matter what the number is. You set 40. Half of those permits are for growth. Half of those permits are going to go to your infrastructure, and infrastructure is finite.
Right.
If we want that to increase, then we have to plan for it and ensure we're putting money away in order to extend the sewer if we need to, you know, as we grow.
Okay. So the sewer is a good defense.
Sewer, water, you know, it's the same thing.
School doesn't seem to be, because you have plenty of capacity in the school.
Yes, we have. School is not at the moment, but
I might suggest that we go through some of the slides on this chapter because the chapter is, you know, when complete, we'll kind of walk through the process of how the town is identifying the different growth areas. I think that based on this discussion, maybe the discussion on sort of the existing permit numbers and allocation, maybe that doesn't belong in the front of the chapter. So I'll think about maybe moving that around a little bit. But if it's all right to sort of continue with the slides, I think we'll go through some of the information. And then at the end of kind of talking about what are the limiting factors in different areas of town, then we can go back and say, well, do the number of permits need to be revised? Do the location of the growth areas need to be revised? And does the growth planning committee need to include some recommendations or strategies for defining affordable, looking at how affordable housing permits are issued and that sort of thing. So those are really important things to keep in mind while we're going through and developing the chapter. And then once we have the information gathered, then that's what we can use to sort of identify those growth areas and kind of objectives for those areas. So I'm going to switch back to the slides if that's okay, but I do want folks to keep in mind, you know, if you had to recommend a specific, you know, task for a zoning amendment, maybe it would be defining affordability, and that's not something that the growth planning committee necessarily has to get into right now, but you could provide some guidance on what to look for. All right, so do you see a PowerPoint again here?
Yes, we do.
So there are a few things that are actually exempt from growth management permit. And this is according to the ordinance currently. And again, if there's, you do have the ability to make suggested recommendations on amendments to the zoning ordinance as, part of your process of developing strategies. But these are actually defined by the state. So, and I think this is not new information, non-residential development, accessory apartments, elderly housing that is, funded or subsidized or operated by state is exempt. And alterations of buildings that are not resulting in additional dwelling units. So those are exempt. There's a couple different areas of information that we're looking at so far in determining the different growth areas. And a lot of that stems from what is required by the state, particularly critical natural resources and other sort of important natural resources that the town identifies, current and proposed infrastructure. So, where infrastructure is going, where you have the capacity to support more housing, where some of those capital investments that we talked about before are planned, development trends, so where development has occurred in the past. Let's say, in a hypothetical situation, all of the development was occurring in the rural area. That might be a reason to relook at where your growth areas are defined and take a look at why all the development is occurring in rural areas. And then sea level rise, which we've talked about, is going to impact vulnerable locations along the coast, along the Kennebunk River, and impact infrastructure over there. And so, does it make sense to have a lot of growth in areas that are vulnerable to sea level rise? Are there any, before I dive into that, are there any other sort of overarching topics or types of information that the committee would like to include sections on, and as far as sort of what's informing how you're identifying the growth areas?
No, I mean, that's a good point you brought up with the sea level rise. And we sort of took a broad brush of where the growth area was, and some of that would be in areas that we wouldn't want to put growth. So we may have to, I don't know how we would identify that separately on the map. Right. Well, some areas, right?
She's got the screen a few screens from now that shows the shoreland and the flood areas.
So there has been some additional chats. Can I just quickly read those off so we keep our folks engaged? All right. So sort of a follow-up on the affordable housing is so there was a comment that we have had no moratorium on building in the past and nothing happened. I'm assuming that meant we still had some growth in permits. Will all these affordable housing units bypass all building fees and land taxes like the KAHT? I think that would be more so how the ordinance would deal with the definition of affordable housing and how that's set up versus KAHT, which was a nonprofit type setup. The land that is served by public sewer is generally much more expensive than that in rural areas. So by making it easier to build there, we are also encouraging more people with higher incomes to live here. Bit of a conundrum. So that's a point. And then housing and food tend to be the most expensive part of one's income. To establish standards for financial guidelines for affordable housing, we should be researching the guidelines of Maine Food Program and housing guidelines. Heritage homes gears towards the moderate income. So, thank you. I appreciate those comments. I think the state of Maine also has a definition of affordable housing, and I thought that was down to 28% of income.
I'll check that out. I just want to take a step back and the goal here is not to really be proposing any at the moment changes to the land use ordinance. That language that we mentioned before on
Hey, Liz.
Yes?
Liz, you kind of muffled a little bit. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, thank you. Can you hear me now? Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. So the language that we had talked about with regard to the affordable housing. So the term affordable housing isn't currently defined. Can you hear me?
You're fading.
Sorry. You start out great and then you slowly get muffled.
Yeah, might be a connection type
Me
thing.
looking closer doesn't help either.
Yeah, I think it's the connection.
Let me try my headphones.
Yeah, you froze a little while ago too, so I think it's the connection.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, Paul. I thought it was my connection.
Okay, how about now?
Mm,
No.
it's better.
Yeah,
It's clear, but it's low. The volume is low.
Okay, well, what if I try to talk really loud? Does that
That's
help?
good.
Yeah, that's better.
But I love
Don't
yelling.
wake up the baby.
Okay, right. So my only point was that the language that was in that draft chapter and that we were talking about is already in the existing land use ordinance. So there weren't the only suggestion at this point was really to define affordable housing. That language is already exists in the town's ordinance. So so just keep that in mind, and we can certainly forward out the sections of the ordinance that include that language for folks to take a look at.
Yeah. Good point, Liz. Thank you.
All right, and just flag me down if I start getting muffled again, and I'll do my best.
Okay.
Keep the volume up. Not sure what happened. All right, so moving on here. This is the full list of things that the state defines as critical natural resources. And so what we did was map out these resources. There's not any, fragile mountain areas or national landmarks to my knowledge in Kennebunkport, but that's the full list of your critical natural resources. And the goal here is to not necessarily say that you can identify growth areas that have critical natural resources in them, but to make sure that those critical natural resources are in some way protected from potential impacts that are caused by development.
Mm-hmm.
There's also conservation land included on here too, just so you can sort of see how that overlaps some of the critical natural resources.
Got all the conservation land, that's all in the green, okay.
Yeah, the hashed area is conserved land. Yep.
Question, Liz. I see you've got tree growth on there. Is that does that just identify properties that are in the current use program?
Yes.
Okay.
What's that?
So this is it's an important distinction to know here. So the current use program, really what that is it's a tax program. And what it means is that if you filed a forest management plan, then you have your property listed essentially as working tree growth. So you have you've got property that on occasion, based on a forest management plan, would be subject to a timber harvest. If you've also applied to the town to be part of the tree growth program, then the property it's assessed significantly lower. I guess is the bottom line is if your property is in one of those tax programs. Now, there's an important distinction here to note, though, that property in tree growth, it's not in that there's not a requirement that it be in that forever. And in fact, it's fairly common for property owners to remove portions of their property from the tree growth program. They have to pay a penalty, which is essentially it can be a hefty chunk of basically the equivalent of back taxes to take land out of it. But it's not something that when you look at properties identified as being tree growth, you shouldn't necessarily think of those as pieces that are not available for development or that couldn't potentially be developed in the future.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah, a developer could use that as a way to just manage cash flow, put in tree growth until they're ready to start moving on it.
That's right. Yep.
Right. And
Is all
pay
the-
low taxes.
Is all the conservation land owned by the same, like, is that trust or is that also the town forest?
A lot of it is the trust. Some of it is the wildlife refuge, like in the coastal area. Some of it is town owned. I think we talked about briefly at one of our, actually during our workshop, the fact that not all of the town forest is permanently protected conservation land. So this just shows the data that we have, which is actually I think the most current data is from the Conservation Trust, but it doesn't include only Conservation Trust properties.
So would it include the quote unquote town forest, or it would not include it?
So that's a question that I do need to check in with Werner about, because I am not clear what is the town forest, what is the conserved town forest versus the unconserved. I'm fairly certain all of the permanently protected conservation land, but I don't know if there are portions of this land that are labeled town forest and portions of other land that are not shown here that are also labeled town forest.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And, this is something that Eli and I were speaking about today, and that we're going to be working on and getting that information back to you, Liz, that'll spell out, specifically of the town property, that we have, that doesn't have any type of building on it, so that's going to be the primary criteria that we have. So vacant town-owned property. We'll identify specifically which of those, either have a deed restriction on them. They're going to fall into, probably three different categories. You're going to have town-owned land that was that the town took for taxes. You're going to have town-owned land that was purchased, and then you're going to have town-owned land that was gifted. Generally speaking, you're going to see that the town-owned land that was gifted oftentimes has restrictions against development. So those are going to have either conservation easements or something like that. The town land that was taken for taxes, you're going to likely not see any development restrictions on those pieces. Most of those are going to be probably a remnant of the 47 fire, but we do have some other pieces here and there that aren't part of that. And then the third is going to be those portions that the town has purchased over the years. Same thing with those. Likely, you're not going to find within any of the deeds or any type of restriction that's going to prevent them from being potentially developed at some point in the future. Our goal is that we'll be able to give you some information, a little bit more specifically about, maybe what, for those pieces that were purchased, maybe if there was something in a warrant article that said what it might be used for, that type of info. But those are the categories that you're gonna hear about in the future.
Do you know the approximate percentage of is conservation land? I think I read. Somebody said in the selectmen meeting about a month ago, it was about 22% non-taxable.
You mean land that's owned by the Conservation Trust?
Yeah, that we don't collect tax on.
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I'd say you're probably not too far off from that. It's probably in the mid 20s.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Liz, in the slides, is the source for this information, I'm a little unclear of this page, this screen. Is this state? Is it town? Is there a footnote that would go to this eventually? So I
can include the, yes, I can include the specific RSA for that. It's, I don't know it off the top of my head.
Is it a combination? This is an aggregation of this law and that law and some state thing?
No, it's not an aggregation. There's a list of what is a critical natural resource. And I can send you the list. I don't remember it off the top of my head. Maybe Werner might know, but there's a list. Yes, there's a list, and I will reference it.
And just because items appear on this list doesn't mean they're actually protected. Is that what we discussed a couple of weeks ago? Meaning that if I owned a 5-acre parcel and I wanted to build my house, plop in the middle of a natural community that's critically imperiled, there would be nothing to stop me from doing that.
It depends on what's in your local zoning, I would say. The critical...
Well, that's what I'm asking. In our local zoning, would I be allowed to develop notwithstanding this critical natural resource, or does our current ordinance protect all of these items?
No, so I would say the short answer to it is that these are not regulatory points, that you see identified here. Now, when you have a property that goes, through a subdivision process, for example, some of these points may identify, maybe a turtle habitat or something of that nature. I think that's, if I'm looking, I'll just use, for example, out on the Oak Ridge Road. There's a subdivision there, that was done a number of years back, Lucia Way. And there's a couple of points there that were that when the subdivision went through the state review process were identified. There was some turtle habitat that was identified as part of that, and so there were specific protections that were put in place as part of the state permitting for that subdivision. Using some of this data here. A lot of these, these are pretty big radiuses that don't necessarily have a well-defined point, or the state data doesn't, when I looked at some of this before as well, it doesn't necessarily identify what the natural resource actually is. So it could be anything from, a plant, it could be an animal, something along those lines. But it's not a regulatory map layer that's referenced in ordinance.
A lot of the coastal areas align with your shoreland regulations. So like the circles, I think the orange circles are what Werner mentioned. A lot of them are like, a location where a species of concern was seen. And so that's why they pop up in the state data layer. So the circles likely don't really correspond with, any of your regulations unless they're also wetlands or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the areas along the coast do actually align pretty well. And that's something that we did look at because you have to, for your growth area is all down, and along the coast, and you need to be able to say, yeah, this is our growth area, where we are targeting residential development, but we have these measures in place to protect, these resources.
Mhm.
And that's, the shoreline and resource protection zoning. So,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, if you look at the wetlands there along Marshall Point Road, just as an example, if you were to look at all of the layers, there's probably about 5 or 6 different regulatory layers, that cover that land area on either side of Marshall Point. So beyond just the regulatory layers, you also have the fact that it's all owned by Rachel Carson to begin with. But either way, even if it wasn't, federally owned property, there's some pretty hefty, regulatory layering that happens there.
So outside of those areas, if I happen to be, whether I've got one of those brown circles or not, if I have I want to build a house, there's nothing in our current process that would protect, say, a vernal pool. Someone would come in, ask to pull a building permit, and assuming everything was fine, they would be given the permit and they could, do whatever they wanted to do with the property. There really is no town interference with them. And I guess the second part of my question is, if that's true, is that normal?
One thing that might happen, Paul, is if a developer wanted to build several houses near a grounds.
I'm talking outside of a subdivision context. I'm talking.
Sure, you've got
a site review.
You have an individual house lot. Let's just use that as the example, because I think that's what the question is. So
that happens a lot in town.
Sure. Yeah. No, we have individual house lots that are done just as part of a split. The state allowed division that lets you split a lot off every 5 years. And so as part of that, this layer here, this critical natural resources layer. So as I've said, it's not a regulatory layer at the local level. So it's not referenced anywhere in our ordinance as something that comes into play. What we do often have whenever we do a permit review for home development is that we have a survey of the property that has wetlands identified, as well as any proposed impact, wetland impact that's proposed. So if a property owner is looking to do say a wetland crossing, we look at that through, the current regulatory layers, that we have and that we're aware of, at the state level. And oftentimes this is that 4,300 square foot minimal impact for freshwater forested wetlands, that's permissible. DEP doesn't require any permitting for that piece of it. At times the Army Corps does want to see permitting for those pieces. And when we have that identified on a plan, we make sure that those permits are obtained as part of our review process.
Oh, I think some of it, I don't know if that's helps answer it. I mean, in the scenario said building it right in the middle, that may not necessarily be the case if, like there's a stream or something that you got to be 75 feet away from, or, you got, vernal pool, it decreases your building envelope as to where you can actually build on the place.
Yeah.
I think we lost you, Liz.
How about now?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, good.
Really weird. I think in the 2012 comp plan, there's a reference to the fact that vernal pools haven't been mapped separate sort of discussion from Paul's question, but that might be something to put on the to-do list for the town. So I'll definitely take a look at the draft text here and make sure it's framed in a way that it is clear that this is not a regulatory map for the town. This is a map of the critical natural resources and other natural resources as well. And the point of including it is for the committee to have this information available when you're defining where growth areas should and shouldn't be. But it's not really used down at like the parcel level when you're looking at where development can and can't occur.
Okay, good point.
We talked about some other natural resources, quite a few others, and the natural resources chapter and will be referenced in this section of the future land use plan for folks who want more detailed information about the particular resources. But there were a couple things that came up in our workshops and growth planning committee discussions, such as the shade trees and the shade tree committee. The town forest issue, which thank you, Werner and Eli, for sending over that info. We'll get that incorporated. Shoreline and resource protection areas, those are your local regulatory protection for some important natural resources. We also discuss things like natural resources within growth areas. And one of the examples that we can look at is the fact that there are wetlands and vernal pools that have been mapped in the village parcel, and that is within a growth area. However, as sort of Werner was alluding to, there are wetland protections in place in the land use ordinance that help ensure that potential impacts to those resources are avoided. And the goal is really just to frame a discussion of saying you can have your growth management area in this location of town, which makes sense for growth. And this is how we're protecting these natural resources that we know are present in some areas. Are there other resources that you'd like to sort of specifically take a look at when we're thinking about the growth management areas?
The only thing that came to mind to me was the water area, the watershed that was over near the town line. While we today get all of our water from the company, which is sourced out of town, there are all kinds of environmental issues that are going on, including these PFAS chemicals, and I think even our own water companies had an issue. So it would seem we need to try to protect our own water in case we ever need it. Should we need to, should there be contamination of, and our supply be questioned or be limited, it would be a shame if we had gone and let our own watershed area, go away.
Thanks, Paul.
Right?
That's a great.
I'll agree with you all.
I'll definitely include that on the list of some of the resources to highlight in the future land use chapter. But I do also want to just acknowledge that just because something's not in this chapter here doesn't mean that we're not going to include recommendations on for example, developing an aquifer protection overlay district in that location where that aquifer is located. So a lot of the recommendations for natural resources are going to be included developed when we go through the natural resources chapter again. And I didn't mean to make it sound like other natural resources won't be, wouldn't be developing strategies for them.
Okay.
All right, great. So this next section is definitely more in progress. If you skimmed the chapter at all, you'll notice there's some gaps. But we are consolidating some of the information from other chapters into sort of one area, summarizing it so that we can take a look at, where is some of the existing infrastructure, where has development occurred, et cetera. I see a typo, and Tom already pointed out that I had one of the labels for the fire station is off.
We took away Paul's fire protection.
So I'll correct that label. But this is just like a draft map that's going to be included in our discussion of where some of the town-owned land is, where this infrastructure is. You've seen these data layers in other chapters. And the goal again is looking at what's the most appropriate location for growth areas versus rural areas versus your transition area.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of labeling items that need to be changed.
Yeah.
So up on there's a larger parcel there that's has two different labels. It says Consolidated School and Department of Public Works and Wastewater Treatment.
Yep.
So that parcel should only be labeled with Department of Public Works.
You don't want to move the school up to the
Up to the highway department, the old dump. Yeah.
I think what happened was I copied all the labels from another map and then clearly got the locations all over the place.
If you want to generate public interest in this comp plan, you got to throw a few of these things out there.
Throwing a few curveballs.
We're paying attention.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and the wastewater treatments
Right. Yeah.
down by Consolidated School.
Right.
The real Consolidated School.
Yeah, I'll throw one other comment out here, a suggestion is because our comp plan's covering the next 10 years, and we know that the town's been planning on moving the town offices. I'm assuming you're all comfortable with putting that in the comp plan as a recommendation, or maybe not. I'm just throwing that out. I don't want to assume anything, actually.
I don't think there's really been a public debate on that.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I don't know that it's a necessary item to put that in the comp plan. And the only reason why, I think, Paul just noted, it's not really been the subject of, a big public discussion. It's been part of, as the town has looked at, we've looked at our, building assets and future needs and growth. That's been one of the things that's been identified, but the area that's been discussed there at the entrance to the village parcel, it's in the same zoning district. It's the concept plan is not one, the one that's been presented doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need any type of zoning amendments or anything of that nature to move forward. If I would say if it needed something like that, then, that might be something that you want to have a more robust discussion on. But that's just my thoughts.
Yeah. All right. Well, we don't have to answer tonight, but I guess the question I'll leave you with tonight is how, if at all, do you want to address that in the comp plan? Just Liz and I don't know how to handle it. But you don't have to answer that tonight.
It's mentioned in your village parcel discussion where you summarized a report where that was included as a possible use of the property. I thought in the narrative that you provided, it seemed, and I didn't go back to look up the report, but it seemed like you were saying the recommendation was to put both the fire department and the town hall there. And what I thought happened was that public use was recommended, and those public uses could include a town hall, a fire department, but there wasn't a determination or recommendation that both of them go on that site. Werner, would you agree that that's what happened?
Yeah. I mean, that's the general, that's generally how that conversation moved along.
Go double check it. Certainly was just trying to sort of reiterate what came out of the reports on the.
I think it was just the "and" that I thought, the word "and," like
okay,
as if the report recommended that that's where the two of them are going. Whereas you also hear people, and you in the discussion say, if there's a consolidation of fire departments onto North Street, then this is what's going to have to happen to North Street.
Right.
Which I think is fine to say, because that's been discussed. It hasn't been decided to do that. No one's, approved that or financed that, but that's certainly been common knowledge that if there was a consolidation, then that would be the likely place for it to go.
Right. In my conversations with town officials, I got the impression that at least some town officials are advocating that. So I'm just trying to get
I think they are
kind of in sync with what the rest of the town, the direction.
I don't want the plan to go down because the voters never had a chance before to vote on this, and here's their chance to vote on it by voting down the comp plan.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Paul. Absolutely.
I'm going to put Warner in a yurt.
Yeah, there hasn't really been any discussion with the growth planning committee about any of those ideas. So that just may be the feeling of some of the town employees.
So when you say those ideas, you mean the like the findings from the village parcel reports?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we have access to it as any other, but it wasn't like we were approached by that committee or by others in the town that we should consider, what was done in that report. I mean, that just came up really in the last workshop where folks mentioned some mentioned that we ought to include it and some mentioned that we shouldn't. So obviously we have to talk to it because it's an important thing that happened in our town.
Right. I mean, the other place it shows up is in the capital improvements program.
Yeah.
Right.
My recollection was that at our last meeting, we did talk about using those reports as resources that the town commissioned from professionals and sort of moving forward with the findings from those reports. So that's the intention sort of with the summary that's in the chapter. Definitely happy to change that, but I just want to sort of be clear on what the direction from all of you is on that item.
I think the way you discussed it was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
To say, here's a summary of what this committee work resulted in, period.
Right.
And so that report exists. It's public knowledge. There was public input. But there hasn't been a subsequent move to, other than, I guess, money is put into a capital fund, Werner.
Been a pretty consistent practice of setting aside funds in various accounts for capital improvements, which, as you all have seen, we did that for the rec building. We did that for the police department. There are funds that are starting to be set aside for town hall. There's funds being set aside for Cape Porpoise Pier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty, that's a long-standing practice that that you all have been working with.
Hey, Liz.
Good.
Did we a meeting or two ago we brushed upon future buildings and what the expectation would be? Does that also? We get kind of incorporating that in there. I can't remember where we talked about that. If we're gonna, have new buildings, we'll have adequate size or have multi-purpose buildings. I don't know if that makes sense to, kind of what Paul's referring to, or, this is great to identify, and we kind of made, notions or expectations about what we expect the buildings to be in the future.
Yeah, there's a couple different topics that that we have identified as issues that we'll want to cover in this chapter, sort of in addition to the bare bones information that is required by the state. And some of those issues are related to the topics that we wanted public input on, the size of houses. We talked a little bit about the impervious surface thresholds. We talked a little bit about different types of uses in different areas of town, like mixed use. We talked about that a little bit. So those are definitely topics that we'll want to cover in this chapter as well.
Yeah, I thought we brushed it, and it was a somewhat brief. We talked about, future buildings, town buildings and stuff. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Jim,
I think we were talking about securing, creating, or identifying a community space,
that's probably what it was. Okay.
Place in the community where everyone could gather for events.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
So just to kind of circle back, I'm fine with what you have written. And I think that leaves it very wide open for what that space will end up finally being once the town decides. I would just be uncomfortable with putting a label on the map saying, future town facility, because that may not happen. It may end up being something that's open space and moderate housing and some other use, like the looking more like what Dock Square looks like or something. So
we don't know. Charrette.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mean, and don't label anything in the village parcel?
Yeah, I wouldn't label anything there. Other than you could label it village parcel, but nothing.
Yep.
Right.
I included a little clip of a small map that was actually from one of the chapters, but it really, I think, just identifies the wetlands and vernal pools that had been mapped. I believe I said that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine.
But yeah, my understanding is that it hasn't really been fully hashed out, and the Growth Planning Committee hasn't weighed in on if you want to recommend anything or not for that parcel. Even if you want to think about directions the town might consider, or your, thoughts on what you think is maybe most appropriate based on what you've learned throughout the process. You can think about if you're comfortable with including sort of that level of information, because I do think people will look to you as, experts on what potential suitable uses of land are in that area.
Okay. Well, that's a good point.
But I understand if there's a hesitancy to really get into too much detail. It's not something we've really focused on.
Right.
Yeah, and it's it's not necessarily something that you have drilled down to the parcel level on other pieces of property either. Mm-hmm. Just as a matter of past practice, but I think because you could well, as you all know, you could write an entire book about, thoughts and processes for the village, for the village parcel, and I think it's appropriate to reference, the study. I think what I've heard you all say is, there was the selectmen, had a group that worked on this, and here's the results of the work that they did, and all factual statements that that I think are just fine to put in a plan.
It's not located in currently in a rural area, so
Right.
so it doesn't really conflict with sort of, at least for where those growth areas are currently defined.
Exactly.
Correct.
If there's
Correct.
different, uses that don't align with that might be appropriate, but don't align with current zoning districts, then that's one area that could be explored if
Sure.
there are potential recommendations on different uses you'd like to see in the zoning districts that the village parcel also falls in. That might be one area to look at too.
Yeah.
We looked at this information before also. Here is another sort of rough map that shows the drinking water service area. And I know, Werner, we've talked about how this looks like a really large area, but it is based on what is available, the data available from the water district. And there are definitely private wells located within that area also, because we have that mapped out in the water resources chapter.
What does GPM stand for? 10 to 15
Gallons per
GPM?
minute.
Gallons per minute.
Gallons per minute.
Gallons per minute.
I'll make a note to write that out.
Well, that's what I thought it was. I was just confused as to how we knew that. And
We know that from the GIS data, which I think is from, I'll have to go back and look at the source for that. It's a state data source.
Yeah. The state has an inventory of well locations and the gallon per minute data that the well drillers supply.
They only did that area? Why is...
So that's actually for the aquifer, and that's
Oh,
the
okay.
area with like higher flow.
That's
It's called
your-
transmissivity.
those are the two.
Flow rate. So if that's where there's the best potential groundwater withdrawal rates in the town.
That's quite a lot. Between 10 and 50, that's a pretty big jump.
It is, but I think the take-home message is a pretty limited area of town.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So maybe we could add that's the aquifers could provide 10 to 50 gallons a minute.
I'll add the aquifer in.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay. So that's
Thank you.
pretty, that's not that much.
And then the green hashed area, this is the 1,000 foot buffer around the existing sewer lines, and that's with the current growth, or the 2012, the current growth management or current comprehensive plan references the area within 1,000 feet of the sewer lines as being targeted for or as being within the growth area. Now the growth area doesn't totally align with that, but that's why we're using that sort of 1,000 foot buffer. And I think we've talked about this before. It's sort of a reasonable distance to tie in.
We had water too, so I don't know if that helps. But it was not just sewer. I'm not sure we had the data for the water infrastructure. I mean, I see we've got the yellow sort of general highlight, but we included water as well.
In the growth.
In the growth, yeah. We identified those areas
Yeah,
in 2009 that were either serviced by sewer and water or were within 1,000 feet. So. Maybe we did sewer or water instead of sewer and water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that the growth area does, I'll have to include it on this map, but it does kind of follow that
Yeah.
that dip around.
And then we use some judgment that we weren't identifying Goose Rocks as a growth area, those kind of things.
Yep.
Yep. And then we also tried not to bisect parcel line parcels as well.
Right.
So one thing I was curious about, part of this process, we're looking at adjacent communities growth management areas. If you have a rural area abutting another community's growth area, there's you're supposed to establish some sort of buffer. So we're tracking down the maps from other communities, and Biddeford actually has their growth areas aligned with their zoning districts. I was curious if that came up as a discussion item in the past for Kennebunkport.
Did it come up in the past? I know in the last time we in the 2012 plan, which we were actually discussing this earlier than that, but we chose not to mess with the zones. That caused some, guesstimation in the reasons why it got voted down. So we stayed away from messing with the zones and just did the growth areas as an overlay.
But you didn't align the...
We didn't align. We aligned with parcels, but not necessarily zones.
So,
I think other than looking at and recognizing that, a pretty big chunk of the rural area is also in the farm and forest zone. Yeah. So that was that I think was a pretty clear sort of recognition and distinction. But otherwise, so the things that would inform the rate of growth limitations didn't necessarily really align with any of the zone districts, other than farm and forest. The other ones didn't, the boundaries didn't necessarily align with any of the constraints, and so I think it would have really required if you're going to do that, you really would have gone into a fair amount of substantial work in redefining all your zone districts.
Okay.
Hey, can you go back real quick? What's that? Just real quick, the public water supplies. What exactly are those locations?
Those are well locations where there are wells that serve, I don't remember what the cutoff is in Maine, larger populations than just like an individual household.
Well, I think it's more tied directly to flow. Those are well locations that have got a pretty high, yield to them. You've got a couple out there that are out by the Trolley Museum.
Yeah, that's what I thought that was.
Right. And then the same thing. They're high yield wells.
But it's just a well, though. We're not doing this. They're not. Right. They're not. What dictates a public water supply? How does that work?
It's really just it's identified by its capacity, in that it's large enough that it could serve as a public water supply.
But it's on private property.
But it's on private property.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm looking at one of those, and there was a development in that area. I'm not sure if that development is supplied by a common well. Right.
Is that hidden? You're talking about Hidden Pond? Is that like?
Well, that's potential. I was thinking of the one down in near School Street in Cape. In that area, there's a development. Maybe that's a water supply serving multiple homes.
Yeah. The Hidden Pond, is that Hidden Pond? That one up there? Is that more like their reserve for like the fire department overflow or something, Warner?
Well, I'm not
No.
familiar. I'm not familiar with that particular point. Let me take a look. See if
Is Hidden Pond
I
on
think it's in
public
the
water?
water resources chapter. We could pull out that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
detail.
don't know. If I was just curious what it means.
So, we did have one other chat, went back to the village parcel, and it was just, I appreciate the pause of the GPC in going forward to establish the village parcel for development recommendations. So thanks for the feedback. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Liz.
Is there another way to characterize public water supplies so that it's more understandable, or that's a state requirement that we?
Nope.
I
This
agree
is
with
really
Paul.
just a map showing the infrastructure. So we don't even have to show those if you don't want them included.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's poor terminology. It's poor terminology because it leads you to think that it's something that it's not.
Right.
I thought it was the fire department.
No.
Where they could hook up and pull water. I thought that's what it was.
No, no, it's not. In New Hampshire, public water supplies are based on, wells that supply a certain number of people. And there's different regulations for, the state has different regulations for public versus non-public water supplies. And so,
Let's just pull it then.
yeah.
Doomsday day comes. I don't want people coming to my house for water.
Well, Jim, you could
I don't know
tell
your
it to them.
address. We won't.
I'll borrow a cup of water.
Here.
Somebody's got to look at that map and start heading to my house.
Yeah.
Just put a big sign there that says Trolley Museum that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Free parking here. You can go walk to get your water.
Dan, I'm just being mindful of the time. Do you want me to continue on here? So the next
We may
topic,
want
or-
to, we may want to save that for the next, how much time do you have left, you think? So, is it 30 minutes?
We got a lot.
Oh, how much is left in the,
I want to make sure that we got enough time.
yeah, there's material.
Liz is speeding up the process here.
Whoa.
You
No
There's a
questions?
decent amount of information.
Yeah.
But what I can do is forward out the slides to everyone. It does just sort of summarize the chapter draft, and Tom and I will keep working on the chapter draft, and then
Okay.
Okay.
we'll get through this information and have some, set of questions that we've already gotten quite a bit of great input tonight from all of you. Ultimately, we do need to decide if the growth management area boundaries are, if there's going to be a change to those, suggest a change to those areas. So
I'll be honest.
while we do this.
Sure, and I'll throw this back at you, at the two of you, because I know you've brought this up a few times, and I personally don't see an issue with an overlay versus having, as you noted, Biddeford has done, where they've identified growth areas associated specific zones. So what I don't understand is the positives and the negatives of doing it the way we're doing it versus the way Biddeford's doing it.
Well,
we're
that'd be a
definitely
good discussion for next meeting.
Yeah.
I just don't see it. So at the moment I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's fine, but what we're doing is acceptable.
Yep. And I wouldn't limit changing the boundaries to just changing them to align with zoning districts. There might be areas of the community that should be in different areas, and they could be remapped by the parcel data like you did last time.
Okay. No, I agree with that, especially when we looked at the restrictions that we have. And some of those are right within the zone. So it may make sense to not include that as part of it. Okay.
Stop sharing here.
Yeah, good discussion.
So our next meeting, we have enough time to talk about this? I forgot the agenda.
Yeah.
We're going to go through the rest of this? Okay.
I think we'll go through the rest of this and then we'll start talking about implementation stuff. All right. So we got at least partway through the future land use section. We should, our homework for the next 2 weeks is review all the other chapters. We can leave this one off, but make sure the other ones, if we see any, major changes that need to be made, let's bring that up. Let's get that information. Let's share it with each other. But just that, we don't want to have a lot of back and forth because that's not public. But if you fortunately read something and you say, hey, I recommend these changes, that should be suitable. Then we'll have that. We'll have the future land use, and then hopefully time to start talking about implementation of things.
Liz and Tom, if you continue to work on this, can you send red lines?
Future land use chapter? Sure.
Yeah, because those of us who have gone through it already, it would be helpful to know what's being changed as opposed to starting all over again.
Mm-hmm.
You mean like when the banks send out their 30-page terms of service agreement? They change one word in it somewhere, you don't know what it was? Helpful, right? All right, so review of the minutes from October 5th, 2021.
Right. I would say that there is an error that I recognize is, I think I typed October 6th, which was my father's birthday. I guess I had that in mind. But he was right.
I did notice that, Janet.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
All right, so we'll amend it to say October 5th?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I make a motion that we accept the minutes as amended to October 5th.
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much, Janet.
You're very welcome.
Okay, and next steps, I think we sort of covered already. So next meeting is
November 2.
Number 2.
Wow.
We're supposed to vote that day, right? But
Yeah.
so get your voting done early. We still can do this remotely, right? Or
Well, you know what? That is a good question. Our video guys, Dave, any thoughts on what that's going to look like there at the fire station, since you guys are operating out of there?
That's right. What it's scheduled, but is that possible? Okay. Is there any reason they couldn't be in there, Werner, that you know of during an election process?
There may be.
Okay.
I'll double check that with Jamie. Thank you. It's the end of the
we
day.
don't want any.
Yeah. No, I know there are specific regs about folks who can be in the room. So
we don't want to be complicit in any rigged election. Yeah.
On that television screen, you guys could broadcast this meeting in polls.
Yeah. So what
If
are
we had to adjust the time of the meeting, we could start a little earlier.
Yeah, it's too late.
Yeah, I don't think we could go earlier.
Earlier.
I don't think we could go earlier.
No.
I think it's elections the whole day, so I think the idea of them being in there might be a problem.
Right.
Or what if we just curtail the meeting to really just go over the remainder of the future land use, and we get through that and we should shorten the meeting?
Is there
But if he's not allowed in the room.
They're right. The problem is the time frame.
No, I thought at 8 they wouldn't be allowed in because that's when.
I'm thinking from 8 to 8. I don't think they may be allowed in the room. Period.
Got it. Okay.
What about November 3rd and November 4th? Does that work for everybody?
Hold on.
There may be other committees meeting on those days. We have to check out.
Yeah, we got to check with that.
So we'll have November 3rd that'll be planning board. as well.
But the first, is anybody meet Monday nights?
I won't be available on the first.
Yeah, I mean, Monday would be a possibility, but
I have a fire department meeting at night, but I could probably miss it.
Tom, did you
So-
say you couldn't?
No, I cannot do November 1st.
Okay, so what about the 4th? Is there anyone doing first and third Thursdays?
I'll check the town calendars for some availabilities there and see what we.
Okay.
Right.
That would be the first.
Yeah,
Yeah. That might work.
4th
Okay.
may work.
Will that work
Fine
for
with me.
you and Tom and Liz? Will that work for you?
Yeah,
On your end?
I'm good with the 4th. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay,
know.
let's-
I can't make the 4th, but that's
Oh.
okay.
Okay. So the other option would be the 9th. I don't know if anyone does second Tuesdays. We go back to our Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't believe that poses an issue with the town, with the town calendar, but that's more going to be everybody else's schedule.
I'm okay with that.
I'm good with that.
I'm okay with that.
All right, let's target the 9th then. It gives us all an extra week to do our homework.
If the
Right.
second doesn't work.
And you are going to be quizzed.
Yes, we are. I know we are.
Okay, let us know.
Okay.
Okay.
What's our meeting after that?
The following week, the 16th.
Okay. So we'll do it back. Okay.
Yeah, we stay right on schedule, I
Yeah,
would say. Unless we make, I think we stay on schedule because the following week's is Thanksgiving. So
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah,
We gotta stay on
just
schedule.
have back-to-backs.
then we could talk about doing the 30th if we need it. Of November. Getting to crunch time. All right. Well, appreciate your work, Liz and Tom, leading us through this. And thank you all for joining us. Is Mr. Fitzgerald still on?
Oh, you left.
All right. There you go. You're up, sir.
Hearing no other items on the agenda that we want to talk about, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Have a good night, all. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yep. Good night, everyone.
Bye.